Nobody has to force most people to go numb. That's what makes it so hard to catch. No one sits you down and says, here's how to abandon parts of yourself without making a scene. No one hands you a manual on how to trade depth for peace, aliveness for functionality, or truth for belonging. No one says, from here on out, make sure your inner world stays quiet enough that nobody else has to adjust it or adjust to it. It happens another way, quietly, through approval, through praise, through the look people give you when you are too honest, through the silence that follows when you say something real and the room doesn't know what to do with it, through the relief on your face when you pull it together fast enough to make everyone comfortable again, through the reward you get from becoming easier to handle, easier to work with, easier to live with, and easier to love. And if you live inside that feedback long enough, you start learning the lesson without anybody ever having to say it out loud. Feel less, recover faster, take up less space, need less, leak less, make it easier on everyone else. And before long, you are not just coping, you are complying.
Copy that, but that's over 216, okay? We went 124 here, we calculated we might need another vehicle. Can you send them over? Go. Copy that, we have a neighbor calling. Chicago Avenue, need emergency. Over. Copy that, we have to change over to Channel 2.
Welcome back to The Architect of Self. I'm Gregory, and I've spent years working with people in the aftermath of pressure, trauma, collapse, adaptation, and the private cost of surviving too well. Not usually the loud ones, not usually the obvious ones, not usually the people everyone points to and says, there's the problem. I'm talking about the capable ones, the composed ones, the high-functioning ones, the ones everyone depends on. The ones who learned how to carry pain without turning it into a public event. The ones who can keep the marriage moving, the family stable, the job intact, the room comfortable, and the emotional weather managed, often by swallowing what they actually feel before it ever has the chance to become visible. And if that kind of survival gets rewarded long enough, it stops looking like adaptation. It starts looking like character. It starts getting called maturity. It starts getting called discipline. It starts getting called emotional intelligence. And it starts getting called strength. And sometimes parts of it are strength. But sometimes what people are praising is not your health. Sometimes they are praising your reduction. Sometimes they are praising how efficiently you learn to trim yourself down into something easier for the world to absorb. This is where the chapter begins. Before we go any further, hear me clearly. This episode includes discussions of mental health, trauma, emotional numbness, depression, and suicide-related themes. It is meant for reflection, recognition, and education. It is not therapy, crisis care, or medical treatment. If you are barely hanging on right now, do not stay here and call this support. Pause the episode, reach for something real and immediate. Call someone you trust, text someone directly, knock on a door. Ask for help plainly, even if you hate how it sounds coming out of your mouth. If you are in the United States, call or text 988 from anywhere 24/7. If you are in immediate danger, call 911 or go to the nearest emergency room. You do not need to wait until it gets worse. You do not need to prove it's bad enough. You do not need to earn help by breaking down in a way other people can understand. You are not too much. You are not failing. And needing more than a podcast can give does not make you weak. It makes you human. Today's episode is part of an ongoing series where I'm opening up the draft of my fourth book, Sedated, and walking through it chapter by chapter in real time. Most authors wait until the manuscript is polished, until the rough edges are gone, until the language has been cleaned up, until the message has been packaged into something tighter, safer, and easier for you to consume. I'm not doing that. I'm letting you in to the living process. Not after the book has been made presentable, not after the difficult parts have been softened, now, while the ideas are still hot, still forming, still sharp enough to cut through the noise. Today we're stepping into Chapter 2, Approved Sedatives. Chapter 1 was about the first dose, how numbness begins quietly, how coping becomes baseline, how protection slowly hardens into identity, and how a person can disappear without ever visibly falling apart. But Chapter 2 goes wider, because sedation is not just personal. It's social, it's relational, it's cultural, it's reinforced, it's rewarded. And most of the time, it is taught without anybody ever naming the lesson directly. No one has to demand your compliance if they can reward your self-erasure. No one has to shame you openly if they can just praise the version of you that asks for less, disrupts less, and recovers fast enough to keep the machine moving. That is what we are getting into here. Not just how people go numb, but how the world helps you do it. How entire systems reward emotional reduction and call it growth. How people get applauded for becoming manageable. How healthy can sometimes become a socially approved form of deadening. How a person can be called grounded, low drama, dependable, regulated, and mature, while being miles away from their own full emotional life. This chapter is about the sedatives nobody questions because they look responsible. The ones disguised as discipline, the ones disguised as self-control, the ones disguised as wellness, the ones disguised as being good to work with, easy to love, and simple to keep around. And if you've ever had the feeling that your life looks stable from the outside but feels thinner than it should from the inside, this chapter is going to hit. Because the world does not always punish you for feeling too much. Sometimes it rewards you for feeling less. And that is more dangerous, because punishment leaves bruises. Reward gets mistaken for truth. All right, let's dig into it. Nobody teaches you how to go numb directly. Nobody clears an afternoon, looks you in the eye and says, here's how you stop feeling so much. There's no class, no orientation, no consent form, no official moment where you knowingly agree to swap depth for manageability. It comes in sideways, through the silence after you say something real and no one knows what to do with it, through the praise you get only after you've pulled yourself back together, through the subtle approval that follows composure, steadiness, usefulness, and restraint. And because human beings are adaptive, because the nervous system is built for survival and belonging, you start learning the lesson without even naming it. You stay busy. You stay useful. You stay steady. You stay ahead of the feeling before it catches up and makes a mess. Now let me be careful here. Those skills are not fake. Some of them are indeed necessary. Some of them are smart. Some of them are life-saving in the season they emerged in. A child learns self-regulation so the house does not explode. An employee learns composure so the paycheck keeps coming. A partner learns restraint so every conflict does not become another fracture. The problem is not the skill. The problem is what happens when the skill becomes the only acceptable form of being. Because once handling it becomes the highest virtue, something shifts. You stop moving toward living, and you start moving toward management. You stop asking, what moved through me? And you start asking, how little did I let it show? You stop asking, what did I actually feel? And you start asking, how fast can I get back to baseline? And that is the brutal shift, because now your body is no longer the place where life happens. It becomes equipment, something to maintain, something to stabilize, something to keep operational. That's not living. That's maintenance. And modern life is built to make that feel normal. There's always another screen, another notification, another episode, another tab, another productivity metric, another thing to optimize. You see, the design of daily life keeps your attention moving just fast enough that almost nothing gets to land all the way. And when nothing lands, nothing rearranges you. That matters, because a distracted life can look full while being emotionally thin. A busy life can look functional while being experimentally vacant. And distraction is not just an accident of modern life anymore. It is one of the most approved sedatives. When feelings show up, they are often treated like inconvenient guests. They are politely acknowledged and immediately redirected. Not now. Later. I can't deal with this yet. I have too much to do. See, the calendar becomes both the container and the excuse. Tasks multiply right on time. Routines harden into armor. Regulation stops being a tool and becomes the goal itself. That is when the feedback loop closes. Parents praise the child who handles it well. Partners relax when nothing escalates. Managers reward consistency, steadiness, and low drama. Therapists may even nod when the reaction gets smaller, quieter, and more manageable. And sometimes that is genuine progress. But sometimes it is something else. Something the system is not rewarding healing. It's rewarding shrinkage. And that is the heart of this chapter. See, the world does not need to force compliance. It just needs to reward it. That's enough. Scroll long enough and you'll see the religion of it everywhere. Wake up earlier. Optimize harder. Track more. Reset your nervous system. Do the challenge. Refine the system. Perfect the morning routine. Master yourself. See, productivity becomes devotion. Self-care becomes performance. Self-mastery becomes a kind of holiness. And all of it is one message. Be less disruptive. Be more manageable. Be easier to absorb. We call it strength now, but I think something got lost in the definition, because strength used to mean range. Now it often means compression. Now it often means looking calm while carrying too much. Looking composed while shutting down pieces of yourself in real time. Looking stable while your own life barely reaches you. Technology speeds this up. Your nervous system was not built for this much input. Not this many pings. Not this many interruptions. Not this much fragmentation. So it adapts the only way it can. It starts skimming instead of inhabiting, previewing instead of experiencing, reacting instead of feeling. A sunrise becomes something you scroll past. Grief becomes a caption. Longing becomes content. A life becomes something you manage in the background while you consume everyone else's in the foreground. And then even self-improvement starts collaborating with the flattening. This is where it gets tricky, because not everything that sounds healthy is actually helping you feel more alive. Sometimes the architecture of healing gets hijacked by the same system that taught you to stay smooth in the first place. Journal prompts become too clean. Breathwork becomes too efficient. Insight becomes another quick hit. Mental health language gets absorbed into the machine. Regulated becomes the gold star. Dysregulated becomes the identity no one wants. And now the goal is no longer, how do I become more fully alive? The goal becomes, how do I stay smooth, stable, acceptable, and easy to contain? That is sedation with better branding. And the nervous system does not do partial sedation very well. When fear gets muted, anticipation gets muted also. When rage gets turned down, so does the fire that tells you something matters. When sorrow gets flattened, tenderness loses depth. And joy, if it shows up at all, comes in cautious and apologetic, like it's trying not to disturb the peace. That is a trade most people do not realize they are making. They think they are muting only pain. What they are often doing is narrowing their range. And range is where life happens. Now I want to say something important here. These approved sedatives were not evil. They were not stupidity. They were not weakness. They were not a moral failure. Most of them were mercy. They helped when things were too sharp, too unstable, too unsafe, and too much. They bought you time when you needed it. They bought you belonging. They bought you survival. But mercy that stays too long stops feeling merciful. It becomes a cage, and that is the tragedy. Not that you adapted, but that no one told you adaptation was supposed to be revisited. No one told you the emergency settings were not meant to become your personality. So years pass. The emergency fades. Life stabilizes. The turbulence decreases. But the sedation stays. Not as medicine, as a default. And then you start using new words for it. I'm chill. I'm practical. I'm not dramatic. I'm realistic. I'm low maintenance. Maybe. Or maybe those are just accurate descriptions of what survived and took over. And once it fuses with identity, relationships start adjusting around it too. People bring you less of themselves. Conflict goes down. Vulnerability thins out. Depth gets replaced by manageable pieces. The room gets calmer. The connection gets thinner. The line matters because intimacy requires friction. And friction requires feeling. And feeling requires permission to exceed the approved range. If that permission is gone, what you get is two people near each other, contained, functional, and careful not to spill. And from the outside, it can all look fine. This is what makes approved sedatives so dangerous. They win by subtraction. No major crisis, no visible wreckage, no dramatic collapse, just less contact, less texture, less depth, less interruption, and less you. And after long enough, flatness starts to feel normal. Sameness starts to feel like peace. The small ache that something is missing gets dismissed as ingratitude, immaturity, or just the price of being an adult. But adulthood is not supposed to mean emotional amputation. Maturity is not the absence of range. Healing is not the same as becoming easier for systems to absorb. That is what I want people to hear in this chapter. The tragedy is not that sedatives exist at all. The tragedy is that most of them are invisible. They're celebrated. They're sanctioned. They're rewarded. They're mistaken for a rival. A life can work on paper and still be almost entirely unlived. That is the paradox. Everything looks fine. The vessel stays unfilled. And if that sounds abstract, look at how early the lessons start. A child cries too long, and the room subtly changes. A student gets rewarded for self-control more than aliveness. A teenager learns to package pain into something socially digestible. A young adult learns that feelings need to fit between the commute and the next deadline. A man learns that stoicism is how you stay safe. A woman learns that softness must stay pleasant, not disruptive. A working-class family learns that collapse is a luxury nobody can afford. A creative learns to make truth more marketable. A parent learns to reroute feeling into function before the household slips. The lesson keeps changing outfits. But the curriculum stays the same. Feel less, function more, keep moving. And then one day, the bill comes due. Usually in midlife. Usually when the structure is finally stable enough for the emptiness to become visible. The kids are older, the career is built, the responsibilities are managed. The life you were told you would feel meaningful once it's settled down has finally settled. And it feels strangely weightless. Accomplishments land flat. Relationships go polite. Pleasure loses depth. The body starts carrying what the mind has been outrunning for years. Tension, fatigue, clinched sleep, shallow breath, low-grade alarm. A body keeping score for a life that kept calling itself fine. And sometimes a crack appears. In a song, a question from your child, a therapy session that goes 5 minutes longer than usual, a walk without your phone, a silence that stretches long enough for something real to rise. And suddenly that old system does not feel peaceful. It feels deadening. This is where return starts. Not as a grand awakening, usually as an inconvenience. As discomfort, as tears with no neat explanation, as anger that feels late but true, as tenderness that does not feel efficient, as honesty that makes the room more real and more dangerous at the same time. Resensitization is not clean. It is clumsy, uneven, sometimes humiliating. Because once you have built a life around staying contained, feeling again can feel like failure at first. But it's not failure. It's contact. It is the body remembering it was built for more than management. And this culture does not give people much of a map for that return. If anything, it tries to sedate the return also. More tools, more regulation, more optimization, more ways to keep the system smooth. But eventually, if you are lucky, something in you gets tired of being well managed and under-lived. Something in you starts wanting not comfort, but contact. Maybe it's from your therapist that keeps telling you to feel your feelings. Not control, but to be present. Not just calm, but aliveness. And that is where I want you to leave this chapter. Not with an answer, with a question. What in your life is being praised because it is healthy? And what in your life is being praised because it makes you look easier to contain? That is not the same thing. And if you have never separated those two, then this chapter was for you. If this episode did its job, then it probably did not leave you feeling very comfortable. Good. It wasn't supposed to. This was not about giving you something inspiring to post, underline, and then go right back into the same well-managed life. It was about helping you notice what you've been trained not to question. What gets rewarded? What gets praised? What gets called maturity, strength, regulation, self-control, discipline, or growth? When underneath of it, something in you may just be getting quieter, smaller, and easier to contain. So don't let this stop here. Pay attention to your life this week. Pay attention to what gets your approval. Pay attention to what gets others' approval. Pay attention to how often you are praised for being calm when what's really happening is that you've learned not to bring your full self into the room. Watch how quickly you redirect pain. Watch how quickly you explain away anger. Watch how quickly you turn sadness into perspective, longing into productivity, and exhaustion into one more thing to push through. Watch the places where your life looks stable but feels thin. That's where the real work is. And if you want a place to put your hands on that work, that's what the guided journals are for. They're not there to help you look reflective. They're not there to help you perform self-awareness. They're not there to give you another polished ritual you can hide inside of. They are there to interrupt you, to catch you in the act of minimizing, to catch you in the act of performing, to catch you in the act of turning your own life into something manageable instead of something lived. And if you look through them and immediately feel resistance, don't rush past that. Resistance is information. Usually the journal you want to dismiss is the one that you got too close. The one that touched the pattern. The one that started pressing against the version of you that has been surviving by staying controlled, useful, agreeable, or quiet. And I'm not asking for a reinvention of your life overnight. I'm asking for honesty, 3 minutes a day, a few real lines, a small interruption in your performance. That's enough. Because the biggest shifts rarely begin as big shifts. They begin as recognition. A sentence that lands harder than expected. A moment in the middle of your day where you catch yourself disappearing. A pattern you can no longer pretend not to see. That's how it starts. Not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly. If you want the journals, the books, or anything tied to this work, it's all at carlhgregory.com. If you want the written version of this, go to Substack. That's where I'm laying out Sedated chapter by chapter in real time while it's still being built. And if this episode hits something in you, don't just move on quietly. Leave a comment. Send me a message. Share it with the person in your life who has mastered being fine so well that no one asks what it really costs them. The friend, the partner, the brother, the sister, the parent, the one who came to mind while you were listening to this. And subscribe, because we're not done. We're only in chapter 2. There's a lot more to pull apart. I'm not here to help you decorate your survival. I'm here to help you see it clearly enough that you stop mistaking it for peace. Stay awake and stop confusing what gets rewarded with what actually heals. Stay in the fight.